I, first of all, just want to thank everyone at the Abigail Adams Institute. I want to thank Matthew for introducing me. Especially, I want to thank Danilo and my good friend James Capuzzi for making this all possible. I want to thank you all for being here today. This is a really, really great opportunity. So, as you can see here, my talk is it's called Traditional Community in a Post-Tradition World. I've subtitled this A Roadmap to a Better Massachusetts, because I'm going to focus on the state that we're in right now. Obviously, there are a lot of great conversations to have and be had about communities in other states, but I figure let's start local for now. So I want to first outline the problem that this idea that traditional intentional communities are attempting to solve. So it could easily be said, and has often been said, you'll hear the phrase around that loneliness is killing us. I want to really sort of dig into that a little bit and think about what exactly that means. So in among my generation, I'm Generation Z, and in among the generation above me, millennials, 13% of people live in the area, in the region where their family is from, where their parents came from, and even lower where their grandparents came from. Now, at the same time, you get 60, 70, and some studies even 80% of people that say that the greatest priority for them when it comes to their happiness, their well-being, is to be close to friends and family. You obviously see a massive disparity here, and most of that, I would say, is pretty clearly the result of, well, one, economics driving people to move from place to place, and two, a real hollowing out of our social spheres. I mean, think of how many of us would maybe like to move to a place where our friends and family are, but we think, well, really, what's waiting for me there? I mean, I could go back and, sure, I'd see my high school and I'd see the local park, but I would have no friends to go back to. And I'd really be, I heard the term recently, I would be stepping backward if I moved home. And well, I think there's a real truth to that. We all sort of feel like that. But frankly, that may be the case. That may be a concern many people have. But that leaves us with a solution that there is not presently a problem to. 61% of people in my generation and the generation above me feel a near constant sense of loneliness, depression, or other illnesses of mental health. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that this is not just a naturally occurring phenomenon, and there are probably some explanations to that. Additionally, in my generation, specifically Generation Z, the rate of suicide has increased 56% just in the past 10 years. I mean, that's a drastic increase in people who essentially feel that there is nothing else for them in the world. So, if you look at the current oldest generation, the boomers, we love the boomers, you see about 72 to 80% of that generation is living close to where their parents grew up. And obviously, every generation has its problems, but the generations above us, the boomers, Generation X, they have a much lower rate of mental illness, a much lower rate of loneliness. They clearly had something and have created something that we have lost over time. And I would like to think about how to solve that. So it seems to me that the problem is absolutely a lack of community. When you look at that massive disparity, when you look at the immense amount of loneliness in our culture, it seems clear that we are made to be in communion, in community with other people. And when we are not, things don't go so well. So in recent years, maybe I'd say the last 40, 50 years, there has been a big push, this movement that I will paint with a broad brush and I'll call the intentional community movement. I just want to sort of make clear what I am defining as an intentional community. I would use 4 parameters. 1, this is a defined group of people. They have a name, they belong to a group, they have a clear and distinct existence as opposed to the rest of the world. The second is they have a concentrated location. This doesn't necessarily have to be a cul-de-sac, but it certainly has to be local. Maybe a town, maybe a county, maybe even a neighborhood if you're lucky. The third is that they have shared values. These are a defined group of people for a reason, and the content of that definition is a value set that these people share that, for one reason or another, they think is not shared by the community that surrounds them, at least to the degree that they share it. The fourth parameter is really a goal of community engagement. In an intentional community, the idea is, well, you plan to live in community and you plan to do so intentionally, as self-explanatory as it is. In an intentional community, you know your neighbors, you're friends with your neighbors, you live close enough that you can form that connection. And, well, all those 4 aspects you can easily see that we don't really have in the modern day culture. So that's what the intentional community movement does. Now, obviously, there are some things that intentional community is not, right? Plenty of people have brought up a certain form of intentional community known as the Benedict option. Going into an insular community, a sort of spiritually, maybe socially, maybe even physically gated community, and shutting yourself off from the world. This is one form of intentional community, as is, a sort of more commune style living where you have group ownership of residential resources and other forms of shared property ownership. I'm not going to focus on either of these versions of community at the moment. There are great conversations to be had about them later, but these both tend to be what people identify most as intentional communities. But I think that we can do a little bit better. So, there's obviously the question hanging in the air. Why would we even form intentional communities in the first place? What is the point of this movement, and why would an intentional community solve the problems that exist? Well, first, you see a lot of these communities pop up in the 80s and 90s, and even going so far as very, very recently. Great examples are, the flat pack democracy movement in England with Peter McFadden, this idea of running for local boards, turning local party politics instead to be independent politics to just take care of your local community. You have the Free State Project in New Hampshire trying to do a similar thing, but get people to move to one area where people share their values, and you can loosen up a lot of the restrictions that would normally exist in a bureaucratic structure. Now, these communities, I think, form very recently because we are looking at a desperately lonely future, and that desperation is naturally going to create something. So, we currently live in this environment where we know that there needs to be a solution to the problem that exists. And in finding a solution, we realize that we need at our root to belong to a culture and to belong to a people. There's an idea that gets brought up a lot in the philosophy of economics that is often called conspicuous consumption. This idea is that you buy a product not only for the joy that product gives, that's one benefit, but also because it gives you a tribal identity. It gives you a knowledge that you are part of a group that takes part in this product, and that implies certain metaphysical characteristics about you. Now, I think culture works the exact same way, and many other philosophers would agree with me. Cultures, in many senses, to belong to a people that sense of belonging is in of itself a sort of product. There is a conspicuous consumption to that. We belong to a tribe, be that, some online strange radical political forum, or just your local community watch. I think we can obviously tell which of those is the more healthy one. So in an absence of belonging to a culture and to a people, while people are looking for a solution to loneliness, people realize that this is a great opportunity to create culture, to create the sense of belonging to a people. Obviously, this idea, this movement, because it's been going on for so long, clearly suggests that there is a chance for some broader change in our culture, and that if only the right people were to take up these projects and were to organize them in the right way, then maybe they would be able to affect that change. I think the most important thing here is not to reinvent the wheel. We have plenty of examples of people before us who have done projects of intentional community, and we will probably have many after and many concurrently. So I think it is very smart to take lessons from the past and lessons from the past of our own community in Massachusetts, because after all, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, basically any state in the Northeast and most states in the country started as intentional communities. People moved from various regions of the world where for some reason they were not able to belong. Either there wasn't the social pressure, or they were themselves cast out. But what you see in most communities as they started in the 17th and 18th centuries in America is you saw what was essentially intentional communities forming. So I think looking at the history of Massachusetts, we can see why Massachusetts is going to be the next fertile ground for an intentional community project. Now, there are three values that I think explain this pretty well, or three aspects, I should say. The first is that this state has great economic opportunities. In our history, the reason to move to places like Massachusetts, like New York, in some cases like California, are these great chances to actually build a family for yourself and be relatively well off. Massachusetts has one of the best standards of living in the country, and the ratio for this state of income to housing price, despite the very high housing prices, is actually still one of the best in the country. Second, we have an old and storied history in this country. We have a strong sense of culture, no matter how buried it is by modernity. If you just walk down, I took the train over from Park, and I was thinking about this talk, and I just looked around and realized that every building I was looking at was probably built at least 200 years ago, and most of them longer. Now, if you look at another city, some other place, you see a lot of cities in the modern day were just built recently. So many of these places had their town centers built only really 50 years ago. If you look at many major cities across the country, they don't have the same history that Massachusetts and particularly Boston have. But we stand out. Our main period of industrialization and the main part of this city was built in the expansion of the 1860s. I mean, that's already nearly 200 years that we have had to really build something. Third, we have fantastic traditional values. And the values of this state, the values of Massachusetts, blend progress and tradition in a way that I think I can argue that no other state does. And I think that me and my friends have been able to boil this down into three core values. The first one is subsidiarity. The principle here is that you ought to handle matters on the most local level possible. The key benefits here are obvious to an intentional community. There is a strong sense of local accountability. At my own hometown in Andover, I regularly see people on the select board walking on the sidewalk, and I can wave to them and I can ask them questions. I know who they are. Second, you get effective and virtuous problem resolution. I mean, think about our modern political climate. How much of our day-to-day life and the day-to-day lives of so many people is just surrounded by this toxic political climate because we have a group of elites that we feel in many cases are unaccountable. But when everything is on a local level, suddenly that's not a problem. Second of these values is Christianity. This is a thoroughly Christian state. I would like to read a small quote here from the Massachusetts Constitution, Article 3, which is frankly some of the best writing ever done. John Adams writes, "The happiness of a people and the good order of preservation of civil government essentially depend upon piety, religion, and morality." That is part of the very foundation of this state. Those first 3 articles were the first things drafted in this Constitution. And we understood from the very beginning that public piety is a way to build community and build virtue. Obviously, religion has been shown throughout history to have an effect of rallying people to do good when used properly. And, well, this is such a thoroughly, deeply religious state in comparison to most states in the country that that value is obviously going to shine through. After all, we still have in this state nearly 60% strong, frequently practicing Christians. And this Christianity, I think, is a basis for a newly formed image of ethnicity, a Massachusetts ethnicity, and a sense of community that ultimately reminds us that we belong here. The third of these values is industriousness. The principle here is that our hard work and our daily lives is going to make for better people and a better community. Though I'm not a Protestant myself, I'm a big fan of the old Protestant adage that idle hands are the devil's plaything. After all, we have seen in Massachusetts, a tiny state compared to most other powerhouses. We have seen that the hard work and the work ethic of the people of this state have made this place it punches much above its weight class because of it. If you have a culture, if you have a local community centered around industriousness, not only are you going to have economic success and sustainability, but you'll also have a sizable socioeconomic influence, which means that you have not only the ability to make your home better, but you have the ability to help out other people in other towns and ultimately in other states make their own communities better. So these are the 3 values that we're operating with: subsidiarity, Christianity, and industriousness. Now, naturally, the question is, what is the process here? How do you actually do this? Because this all sounds very nice. We have a rosy image in our minds. Oh, that's great. I have a community where I know my neighbors. I go to church. I work hard, and we're all rich and happy, and it's just going to happen tomorrow. No, there's a plan. So obviously, we're talking about a generational project here, but I think you can describe this pretty easily, pretty quickly in 5 steps. The first, you have to get a group of people together. You have to formulate a plan. These are your highly intelligent, highly driven counselors who are going to be able to actually figure out how to make this image of a community a reality. That involves starting companies, starting nonprofits, networking with local officials, getting people elected to local office, door knocking. These are all social, political, and economic solutions to formulations to create a solution to this problem. Second, you have to recruit members. You have to get resources. Obviously, if you have a community with only 3 people, that's not really the local community we're going for. But luckily, that's not going to be such a problem here. As we said, the vast majority of our generation feels just overwhelming loneliness. And if you have people all over that say, hey, I want to be part of something great, I want to take a burden, and I want to do something epic, well, then you're going to have plenty of people who want to engage with you in this sort of project. As for gathering resources, that's going to be harder. But this is why you start companies. You start nonprofits, you fund local businesses, and you advance yourselves and your other members in your local careers. Third, you have to choose a town, you have to settle down. Obviously, land ownership, property ownership is central to feeling like you are part of a community and you actually have some stake in your local area. As an intentional community in this vision, well, we're going to have to help each other. We're going to have to set up funds or simply help each other through gifts, to make sure that people actually have the resources and that make them able to buy houses, to buy land, and to, well, exist properly. Fourth, you have to establish a presence. The town needs to know that you're there. After all, if you're going to be a community, you ought to be helping out the people around you that make the infrastructure of your town, which means you need to be doing good works. You need to have the members of your community running for local offices, doing good work on the school boards, the select boards. You need to have the members of your community going to charity drives, doing can drives, everything that we really thought was probably pretty boring in elementary school and we didn't know why we did it. Well, it's time to actually start doing that again. Then fifth, frankly, just enjoy the fruits of your labor. After all, we're looking to build something fun and something cool here. So if we're going to really undertake this project, then we have to understand that there is an end goal to this. And the end goal is getting to enjoy the shade of the tree that you planted. So a whole bunch of my friends have gotten together and we have thought about this quite a bit. So we named ourselves pretty simply the Massachusetts Community Project. Now, this is 3 words that basically express everything we're trying to do. We are people in Massachusetts engaging in a project and building a community. It's really simple as that. The real question here in making this a reality is a question of who will take up the task. And that is why I assume most of you are sitting here. Because I think you all realize that it is us. It's each and every one of us. It's me standing here. It's you sitting here that are actually going to make strong communities. And, well, we are actually going to be the change that we want to see. Ultimately, when I look at this sort of project, and when I look at our potential in doing this, I see a very bright future ahead. I see really a world where we can have our little stronghold, and we can help other people create their own strongholds with healthy families, with economic independence, with wholesome, good local church communities. I mean, the American dream really, and the dream of Massachusetts particularly, is nothing more than the block party, the ultimate block party. We want nothing more than to leave church on Sunday, to have the minister, the pastor who knows you by your first name, who says hi, and then you want someone to say, hey, it's a lovely sunny day and it's roasting hot outside. So let's get together in the park. We're going to have a picnic. We're going to have lemonade and iced tea. We're going to have kids getting dirty and eating worms and all the good things that kids do. And you get to actually look around and think, wow, I built something right here. It seems to me, and maybe this is my economics brain talking, that the ratio of reward to risk is so good that anyone, I particularly, would be a fool to pass it up. Think about the rewards, and then think about the risks. In the very worst case scenario, if anyone undertook a project like this, if anyone attempted to build an intentional community in the state of Massachusetts, the worst case scenario is that you would fail utterly and you would just end up living in a town with a good job, with a good few friends who share your values. Not a bad worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, you make some real change and they're building statues of you in 200 years. So that's something to think about. Thanks for listening.